Welcome to another episode of Show and Tell Books. I'm Chantel,
And I'm Amber.
and today we are going to be talking about the historical fiction novel The Nightingale by Kristin Hannah.
I'm excited to talk about this one. I have some friends who have read, I think, every single one of her books and love her writing. I'm glad I finally read one.
Can I just say, I think it's really funny because every video we probably start with, I'm excited to talk about this. And I realized in my head, if we weren't excited to talk about it, we wouldn't pick it to do a YouTube video on, but it just makes me laugh. So maybe eventually we'll come up with a new intro. But I
Yeah.
agree with you because Kristin Hannah has been on my TBR since she kind of debuted, what was it, in like 2012-ish? And so the fact that I hadn't read her up until this point was really sad. And I got always shamed whenever I'd go to a bookstore and talk to people, and they're like, "Oh, have you read this one?" And I'm like, "No, nope, I haven't. She's on the list, just haven't gotten around to it." So I'm glad we picked The Nightingale to talk about because I loved it, and I can see why everyone is obsessed with her writing and her novels because she is such a fantastic author.
Something she does very, very well is making the topic she's writing about easy to understand, relatable. You feel like a witness to this story.
Basically,
It
a fly on the wall.
Yeah, it feels very realistic. So, in the case of the Nightingale, you're looking at Nazi occupation of France in World War II. The subject alone lends itself to very heavy reading. And I thought she did a beautiful job of addressing some serious themes in this
Mm-hmm.
novel, including like the core nature of a person. Are they programmed or innately capable of doing bad, or is it the inaction in a time of needed action, or are some people just incredibly brave and selfless?
I think in addition to that, it also really highlighted what family is and what you're willing to risk for your family. I thought it was beautifully written. No wonder it won like Goodreads Best Historical Fiction for 2015. It just was touching.
Well, I was also just going to say I'm not surprised that this is being made into a motion picture.
Wait, what?
Yeah.
Okay, well that's gonna be good.
Hello
I didn't know
Sunshine.
that.
Hello Sunshine, Reese
Okay,
Witherspoon's project company are adapting it to motion pictures.
I am so excited because All the Light We Cannot See is also being turned into a limited time Netflix series in November. And that's one of my absolute favorite historical fiction novels. And it ties in actually really well with The Nightingale. So I'm excited because there's going to be some really good movie book to film adaptations coming out in the next like year-ish. So The Nightingale tells a tale of two sisters. Vianne, she's the oldest. She's married, has a kid. Part of the story is told from her perspective of her town being occupied by Nazis and what she has to do in order to survive and how she helps those around her also survive. Additionally, she also has a Nazi soldier who's housed at her house. And that then paints a really pretty picture of the humanity on both sides of this war, which I thought was really touching and very powerful because it shows that war isn't black and white as much as we kind of wish it would be or portray it that way. And so she has to learn to live in the gray of realizing that the oppressors are also human. And how do you balance that with what they're also doing or what they're being ordered to do? And so that's part one of the story. And then part two also is Vianne's younger sister, Isabelle, her fighting for France and against the Nazis and everything that she is doing as essentially a rebel, I would say, or as a spy to help get people out of occupied France and into free zones. And so it's really beautiful. The two sisters, and they're so dynamically different, and their stories are different, but how they're juxtaposed against each other for both like the justice and the mercy in a way, but also showing the roundedness of war and posing the question of what you would do in this scenario to save lives around you, or how we all can help those around us. And sometimes in big ways, like crossing the Pyrenees, or in small ways, like hiding your Jewish best friend's child.
In Vianne's case, it's showcasing the human side of Nazi soldiers. I think so oftentimes they're depicted as robots in a sense, automatons, like not necessarily capable of thinking or feeling on their own. And I'm not surprised that media and the way that we're educated about Nazi Germany and the Holocaust dehumanizes the soldiers from Germany. So Vianne's story really looks at the human element, the human condition in occupied France from both sides, those who are being occupied and those who are the oppressors. It also does an outstanding job of exploring parental and child relationships. You see the girl's relationship with their father, which is estranged, troubled, how that develops throughout the war, as well as Vianne's relationship with her daughter, and the narrator's relationship with their child. And I say the narrator because you don't really find out who's narrating the future part of this book until the very end, which was brilliant on the author's part. I loved that hint of mystery to keep me engaged throughout the story. My one complaint with this writing, though, was there were parts that were repetitive. So listening to it as an audiobook, there were a number of times that I felt like the chapter didn't flow as well because there was information being repeated. And it wasn't necessarily just when the point of view changed, but chapter to chapter. But given that that's my only complaint, like that's pretty minor.
I thought it was really interesting because, again, World War II books, World War I is my favorite too, but World War II are probably the ones that I read most of when it comes to historical fiction. So a couple months ago, I read All the Light We Cannot See, and I loved it. And around that same time period, I watched Netflix's, it's a limited series called Transatlantic. I would highly recommend it if you like this kind of genre, because that's what it is. And I read the book that that's based off of. But it's interesting and fascinating because I watched the show and read those books and then read this one, and it all connects, which I know it's a historical fiction, so this parts of this actually happened. But I loved, in a way, seeing the network of historical fiction books that are out there all kind of interconnect, even though they're different stories and they're different authors. But the fact that, like, this book talks about Vichy and the occupation of France in certain locations and how the residents were trying to rise up against it. And Transatlantic focuses on that last free part of France and the movement of allies and them getting those on the Nazis' watch list, both of a variety of religions and also demographics, and getting them out of free France at that point and then taking them through the Pyrenees. And it was just cool seeing that that's what also the Nightingale focuses on. That's what Isabelle does, is takes downed fighter pilots and Jews and a bunch of people across the Pyrenees into Spain and Portugal. So it was just really cool seeing how it all connects because it all happened, and just getting a broader picture of World War II in a way that we can't because we didn't live it.
Yeah. I actually studied World War II as part of my degree in college, and specifically modern German history. So to read this fictionalized version of the textbooks essentially was it just brought a new dimension to the history I'm familiar with. So I almost would say read this if you are studying those courses. Like if you're a college student and you're studying World War II, or you're studying modern German history, political science, this is a great fiction book to pick up because it humanizes what you're reading about. Textbooks can be dry. This adds that extra dimension of relatability it can be hard to read because Kristin Hannah did an excellent job of sharing the heartbreak that came along with those atrocities and what happened. The story is beautiful. It's moving. She captured so many different elements of life. And I don't want to give spoilers, but there are some parts of this book that were very emotional and very, very trying to read. And she did such a great job of shining a light in those dark aspects of the story as well.
She balanced the horrors of war with the beauty that can be found. And I think that was what was so powerful about her book is she reminded us that even when things are horrible, that there are good things that can still happen.
So what did you rate this book?
I gave it 4 stars.
Same.
One of my favorite quotes from the book talked about how love needed to be stronger than hate. And you see that happen in the novel, especially with the 2 sisters for a little bit. One focuses on one emotion and one focuses on the other. And you see that start to kind of hurt their lives. And so I thought that was just a really powerful quote and very applicable in everyone's life.
Yeah. My favorite quote was, "Men tell stories, women get on with it. For us, it was a shadow war. There were no parades for us when it was over, no medals or mentions in history books. We did what we had to during the war, and when it was over, we picked up the pieces and started our lives over." I don't know, that brings tears to my eyes, like even now, just because I remember hearing stories from my family members who lived through World War II. And as an American, it's a different experience than what those in Europe faced. But truly, women were the ones who were left behind and had to figure out how to move forward. They filled jobs that needed to be filled, or they had to make ends meet with very meager rations and supplies. So I don't know. There's a lot in that quote. And I think she just captured the female existence in wartime so well. It doesn't matter which war you're talking about. Unfortunately, it's a shared experience for all women in every conflict. I also truly appreciate that these women were so young that she focused on. I believe Isabelle was maybe 19 by the end of the war, right? Like very young. And Vianne wasn't much older. She was still in her 20s experiencing this. And so having the perspective of how war ages you, I think that was a prominent theme throughout the book. I don't know how much of it is historically accurate in terms of the Nightingale and that operation, but there is still a lot of truth to be found in this book, and it is a true representation of what events took place. So I wouldn't lose sight of that when you're like, oh, well, it's a fiction book. It's a fiction book in that the names and characters are made up. Everything else is historical in nature.
There were still people who did what Isabelle did. There were people who did what Vianne does. There were people who did what all of the characters throughout the novel did in real life. We might not have historical documentation of who they were, but I guarantee you that those people had situations just like that and did and sacrificed so much in order to see the war out.
One last parting thought is the book ended with a conversation on the impact on Jews after World War II. And I felt like that focus was extremely powerful. I understood that the Jewish people lost so much during World War II. I felt like Kristin Hannah did such a great job of truly driving the point home when the characters had to face the reality that an entire generation of Jews were lost and what that meant for the religion, the culture, those who survived. I wouldn't feel good about ending the episode unless we highlighted that.
Overall moral of the story, don't be like us. If it's been on your TBR for, almost 10 years, it has been on my list since it came out, which was in 2015. And I am sad that it took me this long to read it because it was, again, amazing, like we've been saying. So read this book. If it's on your list, if you like World War II books, if you like historical fiction books, or if you want a book that will kind of smack you in the feels, definitely read this book. I don't think you'll regret it. Are there any other historical fiction books that you guys love? Let us know. And we will see you guys next time.